Okay, so you completed your value scale of a color using white and black and to create tints and shades. Now, you can also create tones of a color, or sometimes you'll hear me say to tone down a color. You'll especially want to do this if we're working on a landscape, doing landscape where you need to use grays and adding gray to a color to create atmospheric perspective. And so how do you make gray? Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a grayscale right here in the second row. And so for this one, all you'll need is black and white. You can see that I got a fresh piece of palette paper. Remember that the paint goes on the waxy side of the palette paper. Please remember the nickel rule. Try not to make your blobs of paint any bigger than a nickel, otherwise you're wasting paint. You can see I put out a little bit too much white there, and so I will be wasting a little bit of paint there, but what are you going to do? Okay, so for the first one, we're going to start with, it says white mixed with a touch of black. So with this, I'm going to separate out just a little bit, right about half of this blob. And I'm going to take, again, just remember to have a paper towel handy. You can wipe off your palette knife, get it clean very quickly. And I'm going to take just a touch of the black. Again, it's a tiny, tiny bit onto the palette knife. You see, it's just a tiny, it's right on the corner. And I'm going to add that into the white. Even that for my first square, I think is going to be, even that is a little bit too dark. So I'm just going to take some of the gray that's already on there and just go into that second part. There we go. So it's a very, very light gray. It's almost all white, but there's just that touch of black there to make this very light gray. And I'll use my brush. I washed out my brush. Make sure to wash it out really good, otherwise your color will appear in there. And you can see probably on the screen, on your screen there, and in the video, this probably looks black, white, but it's not. There's a slight just touch of gray in there. Okay, now we're gonna take, again, I'm gonna use this gray that I just mixed and just mix some more of that into there. There we go. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to get a very slight gradation going across, a gradation grayscale. Next one, B, where it says just a little bit more. So you can see it's just slightly darker. And I'm gonna do the same thing. Now I get to this one. It's probably, this is kind of our next one here. That sort of gray. I can look at the two beside each other and tell that this one is just slightly darker. That's about the mid-tone that I want. You can see that C, D, and E are going to be our mid-tones. And this is a mid-tone gray, where it's almost, or going toward a 50-50 mixture of black and white to create mid-tones. Now, to that, I'm gonna, again, tiny, tiny bit, because you're gonna see it's gonna change it very quickly to the next square. And again, color mixing, this is something that you need to get into practice of. You do not want to use paint right out of the tube. Paint right out of the tube just creates very flat looking paintings with no depth to them at all. This is how you create depth, is using your value scales, right? Now, again, tiny, tiny bit. Ooh, that was a lot. Okay. And you can see each time it's getting darker and darker. Now, notice I'm adding the black into the white, okay? That is because it's just easier to sort of make the transition. If you add too much black into the white, you see you can't remove it out of there. I could always add just a little bit more, a little bit more. You always want to add the darker color, or the darker color into the lighter blob, okay? That's the best way for mixing. If you do it vice versa, then you're gonna get frustrated because you're gonna be using a lot of paint to try and get the tone or the tint or the shade that you're looking for. All right, you can see very slight gradation as it goes across. Again, now I'm going a little bit darker. That one, let's get some of that in there. So what will happen is the last one will almost be toward a black. Or a Payne's gray. It's also called a Payne's gray. Paynes. Okay, you can see that the one great thing about grays is that it will cover pencil marks, it covers the print. So it's a great thing if you needed to paint over something, is to use a gray or a color mixed with gray. If you're trying to paint something out or paint over something. It's a good idea to actually start your painting, whether you're doing a landscape, portrait, anything, with a grayscale. Or with a neutral tone scale, like an ochre or even a brown, reddish brown. And I'll show you how to do that as well later. Okay, so there's my last square there of my grayscale. I was trying to do a smooth transition. It was quite a jump right there, but for the most part, there is definitely a difference between each one of these grays all the way across. All of them are gray, but you can see there's a whole range of grays, including our mid-tones here in the middle, those mid-tones, all right? So again, you can always add a gray into a color to tone down a color, what we call toning down. All right, good luck.